drives are very time consuming and can be treacherous. And, we've all kind of agreed in our meeting groups that, it is still good to get together on a personal basis, to share ideas in more of a personal way. But again, we've all commented that, this winter, especially some of the days where, it may be sunny over in Lansing, but maybe a blizzard here, it's pretty advantageous for us to Zoom in. And also, to be honest with you, it does save a lot of time in my day for me, and I know it does for others also. I've mentioned that, you got an hour and a half drive to Lansing, you're there for a 2-hour meeting, and then you get another hour and a half drive back. And, that 3 hours out of the day can sometimes be that catch-up time that we need to stay caught up with things at work.
Yeah, I mean, I see this as having some very positive effects, including, and I know for me, my kids live out of state, so when we're able to visit each other online, it is kind of like a visit in real life. And my best friend she and I used to switch visits, from here to there. Anyway, we haven't been able to do that for months, so we Zoom.
Yes, yeah. Like I said, there's great benefits to it. I have a daughter that lives overseas right now, and during this time, it's great to communicate and to be able to see each other. And the other benefit we've really found, and it's more on the court end, and I don't know if Gary has talked with any of the judges on Talk of the Town, but a lot of stuff at the courts right now are being done through Zoom. Criminal and some, especially on the civil end of things. And it's actually, at first, there were some bumps in the road. But as we got through the technology issues, the courts have seemed to adapt very well to it. And again, I think it's something that we're going to see in the future here. And even some of our county board meetings recently were conducted by video.
Yeah, which as a reporter, I find that great transparency. Now, does it save time for your officers? Could they Zoom into a courtroom? And that sounds weird, but
yes. No, actually they have been, especially on some of the traffic cases where somebody wants to dispute a traffic ticket. They've been doing those by Zoom. And so the officers are set up that, they can do it from one of the branch offices. We actually looked at if they could actually do those, and those are very short hearings. If they could do those from the computer in their patrol cars to, park in the branch office parking lot. Or if it's their day off, they can Zoom in from home. But again, yes, it saves time that way also, because sometimes an officer has to travel away from the north end of the county down to Holland. And that takes that deputy out of that area for a period of time. And, some of those civil infraction hearings are, could be only 15 minutes long in most cases. So again, there are the benefits to the in-person. And, I know the judges at times prefer to see people in person. And just like, at times I prefer to see people in person. But again, I think, in the future, as the technology gets better, enhancements, bandwidth, all that good stuff, it's really made a difference during this COVID period for us in law enforcement to be able to communicate. Because again, I was kind of joking. I haven't been in the studio there for several months. Always enjoy coming in, but we've been able to keep this open line of communication, with the media through Zoom and other applications out there.
Which I think is really great. The one thing I think about when it comes to courts is people who live in poverty who, the good news is they don't have to drive out, for instance, all the way out to the Fillmore Center for a court thing, but at the same time, they may not have the technology to do a Zoom meeting. And what happens with those folks, whether it's a traffic ticket or something else? How is your department adapting to make sure these cases go through the justice system properly and people aren't getting extra penalties simply because they're poor and they don't have access?
Right. And again, we are on the enforcement end, so the courts have been working very closely with the people. So it really kind of falls into the court's jurisdiction there when it comes to appearances, fines and costs, and everything else associated with that. But again, I think for some people, a video appearance for a basic case would be good. Some have daycare issues. Others don't have a mode of transportation. If they have to rely on public transit, that may not reach out into some of our more rural areas. But like I mentioned too, I know one person said, just the daycare issue is I can use my iPhone or my cell phone and quickly jump into a meeting or a short hearing or discuss something with a judge or a prosecutor or even a private attorney. It saves that kind of headache of having to try to find somebody to watch the kids or how am I going to get down there. So again, as in the courts, I think, there's a lot of things coming out of scale out of the Supreme Court in Michigan as to, rules and regulations as to the proper way to use these in court proceedings. I think one of the questions I had, and I really haven't heard the answer yet, is there the possibility they could conduct a jury trial by video if needed?
By Zoom?
Yeah, and again, to me, I think, in a trial like that, you would want the jury there in person. And I think that's probably the feeling of the judges too. But, everybody's really doing some very creative thinking as to how technology can assist us during these type of situations. And again, I think, between COVID and, the isolation and not meeting it's going to change the world a little bit as to how we conduct meetings. I've talked to business people in the community that said too, I used to fly people halfway across the United States for, a 3 or 4 hour meeting and then fly them back home or put them up overnight. A lot more people are doing meetings this way, with other people clear across the other side of the country.
So from an enforcement standpoint, to back up a little bit, if for some reason someone doesn't have access to a court hearing for, say, a traffic citation and they get pulled over again, how do you handle something like that? When an officer, what's their latitude for making a decision if they pull someone over, they haven't been able to go through the system, now they've got this outstanding court date and they've got a ticket for whatever, like a traffic citation?
I think there's resources available through the court. Obviously, it's the officer's discretion if they're going to take enforcement action. But again, I think there's even people within this community that are willing to help people out to get them in for a court appearance if need be. But again, it really lies upon the fact that the prosecutor and the courts have the final say as to whether if you show up or don't show up for court.
You sent me an interesting but rather long piece about bicyclists and insurance and injuries. And why did that thing in particular catch your eye, and what should people know?
Well, I wanted to dive, actually, today's a quiet day for me, Peg. I was going to dive into some of the things I know. There's been several law changes. The whole no-fault insurance thing, sometimes I kind of think I'd need to be a doctor to understand, all the terminology and everything that they're using. But yeah, today I was going to kind of educate myself on the no-fault insurance. And then, of course, we've also got the new slow no-wake zones that are coming in Port Sheldon and Lake McNichol. But it caught my attention because if you don't have insurance and you're hit on your bicycle, there's some chance that you don't have coverage in that. So again, I think, most people rely on their car insurance because I think part of that does cover if you are injured, in another manner. But I think it's important for people to, be aware of that. Again, I wasn't even aware of it until I saw that little news clip. I thought, boy, this is kind of interesting. I want to dive into it. And I know you like interesting stuff, so I sent it off to you right away.
Yeah, and
it's just one of those little things that people aren't aware of.
That was one of those days when I actually went home for lunch and let the dog out and rode my bike back. And then when I got here, I heard there was a car bike accident or crash, whatever, here in Holland. I haven't gotten information on it, but there isn't a week that goes by lately, especially with people getting back on the road, where I haven't heard of, car bike, moped, motorcycle, things like that, where they're the non-traditional sort of modes of transportation. And I'm sure pedestrian crashes are going to increase too, because your officers have had a dozen, I think I maybe have gotten in the last 8 days, like a dozen different press releases on crashes.
Yes. We kind of noticed, we watched our numbers during the COVID time when when things first started, our numbers drastically dropped. The only thing that we saw an increase in was mental health incidents. and also our domestic violence went up by about almost 51%. But as things started to reopen, as the weather got nice, a lot of people were out walking. I noticed a large increase in bicycle traffic, throughout the county. The motorcycles were back out again. And again, talking to a friend that owns a bike shop in the Holland area, bike sales really seem to have gone up, especially with the COVID. People out using that. But again, I think, with the increased bike traffic, people are going to have to be more aware. We also tell the bicyclists they're going to have to be more aware and make sure that they obey the rules of the road. And, this area is great for cycling. I mean, we have a bike path system, sidewalk system through the Holland area, and now you can ride all the way from Holland and get into Grand Rapids through the south end of the county. We have the trails through the north end of the county, but some of the trails do require that you have to travel on the roadway in areas. I know some of the other bikers like to ride on the roadway. Lakeshore Drive is a good example in the Holland area there, where they have widened the side of the roadway to give the bicyclists more room. There's the new law that went into effect last year, where when you pass a bicyclist at least 3 foot, and one of the things I do myself is, when I see these bicyclists, if I safely can, I move all the way over into the other lane now. Again, you have your sports enthusiast bicyclist, and if you probably noticed, some of those people can move right along, and then you have your recreational bikers. But again, with the increased traffic now, the nice weather, especially this coming week, with the weather forecast that is out there, our concerns are always with pedestrians, bicyclists, motorcycles, especially. And also, it's that time of year. Last night we had a significant crash that we feel alcohol was involved in. And that's one of the things that we are constantly seeing yet is alcohol in traffic crashes.
That was the Detroit 49-year-old Detroit man who ended up at Spectrum and with serious injuries. Yes. Yeah, and that's your background. You were when I first came here 15 years ago, you were the lead guy in the traffic division. You've got all this crash training.
Yeah, I was the lead accident reconstructionist for the agency for many years. Handled close to 400 fatal accidents during my career, and a large amount of those during the time that I was the accident reconstructionist. And it's, the thing about that job that it taught me is, life can change in a split second. Many times I stood out at those intersections at these fatal accidents or very serious accidents, and just a half second either way, they would have missed each other. Why did they not see the stop sign? And that was the biggest question I got from families that lost a loved one in an accident, is why? Why did this happen? And, most of the time in our job was to reconstruct that accident and come up with the answers for them. And in some cases we could not because the at fault was deceased. And we've had crashes where all individuals in that crash were deceased. So it was our job to come in and put that crash back together. And, my goal was for the families was to always try to come up with some closure for them as to why that accident happened. A couple of them stick in my mind very well, and one is that, we didn't know why this guy went off the road and, hit a tree, and it wasn't really a high speed. We determined he was traveling at roadway travel. We determined he was healthy. The autopsy showed no medical. So what happened? And we really went back to that to the point where we got a mechanic in, and we found that the steering control on the vehicle had broken. And that gave the family, a sense of, okay, we now know that, it was not him. It was a mechanical issue with the car. So again, we always dived into these, and that's why these investigations aren't completed overnight. A lot of people are like, oh, it's been 3 or 4 days since the accident. How come you don't have answers for us? It's because we are going back and piecing this together step by step. And nowadays too, we go back now and we look at, for video from along the roadways where the car may have passed prior to the crash. And the information that the cars give us nowadays too is amazing out of the computers of the cars. So, but yeah, that was always my goal, is for, the victims and even the suspect that dies in the crashes, that the families have questions. And my goal is to always answer those. And again, doing that many of them in my career.
The thing that I learned covering these crashes, and I've covered them for far longer than I've been here in Holland, but the thing that people say, whether it's a traffic crash, sometimes it's a fire, they say it happens so fast. I've heard that so many times. You probably heard that a million times. It happens so fast, or they came from out of nowhere, you know. And I think every officer I've ever talked to through the years, I've always said, what are your top, I don't do this anymore because I've done it so much, top 3 traffic tips. Slow down, look twice at every intersection, slow down.
Right.
Don't drink and drive.
Exactly. You know, and in today's society, we are so mobile. You know, and, you know, I think nowadays I see people are more time constraints on them where, you know, they're doing stuff in the car, you know, our phones over the years, you know, back when I started, we didn't have cell phones. I don't want to date myself, but then, you know, we moved into the plug-in car phone, and then we moved to the little flip phones. You know, now I have my whole office on my hip on my cell phone.
Wow.
And it's just so easy for people to, you know, kind of quick take a glance, but it takes just a split second. You know, and I tell people too, you know, like motorcycles, bicyclists, and pedestrians, you know, sit in your car sometime and just hold your hand up with just your index finger. And that index finger, just the width of your index finger, can block a motorcyclist or a pedestrian or bicyclist. And that's why we tell people, you know, and I've taught my kids and I tell many others that look twice. You know, when I had a stop sign too, you know, I look left, I look right, and I always find myself looking left again and looking right again. Just take that extra second. Because again, it seems like nowadays that we're always in a hurry. And you know, these are tragic crashes, and it affects not just the families. It has this whole spider web effect. It affects friends, it affects your co-workers, your employers, you know, and you know, the recovery period. You know, I've talked to people that, you know, it's taken them years to recover from accidents, from their injuries. So again, you know, driving's we always say it's a privilege, and we just ask people to really, you know, be careful and take that extra time. You know.
We're going to take a minute right now and hear from CNBC. We'll be right back with Ottawa County Sheriff Steve Kempker.
CNBC. Stocks are lower at the open on Wall Street this morning. The Fed put restrictions on bank stock buybacks and dividends last night after some stress test failures. Coronavirus mortgage bailout soared as homeowners are facing some new struggles. And Nike reported rotten quarterly results last night after the closing bell. Texas has paused its reopening while COVID-19 cases surge, hospitalizations swell, especially in Houston. The state of Florida also not opening any further as its coronavirus cases soar. The Trump administration today asking the Supreme Court to again strike down Obamacare, which forces insurance companies to pay for pre-existing conditions. This is COVID-19 and lung issues associated are now considered pre-existing conditions and may not be covered. Airlines going back to the federal government for more bailout money. The major CEOs meet with Vice President today. Jessica Edgarson.
I've always wanted to learn another language, so I decided to give Babbel a try, and I really like the teaching method of the app. I started with the beginner lesson on Babbel, and soon you're putting words into a conversation. Each lesson takes about 10 to 15 minutes, and they're all really different, which keeps things interesting. I can't wait to use my Spanish skills in real life. Dos cervezas, por favor.
Now try Babbel free. Just go to Babbel.com and start learning a new language today. That's BABBEL.com.
On the battlefield, there's a saying America's military men and women live by. Never leave a fallen warrior behind.
Okay.
Off the battlefield, Wounded Warrior Project operates with the same goal. Wounded Warrior Project was created to help our men and women returning home with the scars of war, whether those scars are physical or mental. Wounded Warrior Project. We never leave a fallen warrior behind. Ever. Learn more about what we do at woundedwarriorproject.org.
Weather on 99.7 and 1450 WHTC is presented by Lakeshore Memorial Services on James, just east of 120th Avenue in Holland.
And we are back with Sheriff Steve Kempker from Ottawa County, we've got about a minute left, and I know you wanted to talk about slow no wake zones. Are they going to get it on Lake Mac? That's the big question. We know it's up on Pigeon Lake for the rest of the season.
Well, looking at the paper this morning, it looks like I believe Park Township Board did approve to move forward with some slow no wake changes. Port Sheldon Township submitted to the DNR to make their changes, and those were granted. And again, before we can do any proper enforcement, and Port Sheldon Township has already put the signage up and the buoys. It's going to be a large educational process, probably even a larger process down in the Lake Macatawa. And again, we're prepared for that, working very closely with the jurisdictions along the shores of Lake Macatawa. I've been out, had the opportunity to take a look, how high the water is and what happens when these larger wakes do come in. But again, I think we're in this cycle, many years ago when we were in this cycle, when it was high before, I actually was working the Marine Division. And it's a sad situation, but hopefully our water levels do start to drop down. But again, they're taking these actions to protect the shoreline and the properties.
Park Township has to go to DNR to get the permission, correct?
I believe so. We have a meeting with Park Township on Monday morning, actually. And I'm sure that'll be a topic of discussion. We'll be there with our Marine Division and us.
Well, Sheriff Steve Kempker, thank you so much for being with us today. We're going to jump over to the news, and we'll have more on the other side, folks.